between LeBron, his team, J.R. Smith, bringing people together. It's like working in the real world. And then you got Steph Curry and Kevin Durant and Thompson, and just they're pulling together defensively and offensively. They're doing the right things. So we're going to talk about teamwork and camaraderie today, but we got a show for you people. We're going to talk about players, patriots, and politicians. But as we do that, and we're listening to the NBA playoffs theme song, we're also going to talk about, it's Gay Pride Month this month. We also have the Colorado primaries. Now, as I say that, I'm looking at my Facebook screen here to see if I can get my guest on this morning, Steve Robinson. Now, Stephen, if we don't, I'm gonna break here in a minute as we introduce the show for today, and continue to talk about the Colorado primaries are coming up at the end of the month. You probably have your votes, voting registration, your ballots. That's it. That's what I'm trying to say. Got your ballots in the mail if you're putting in by mail. Lots of drop boxes around the communities. Read the information in that mailing with your ballot very carefully because it gives you lots of information. If you don't trust the mail to make sure your vote gets counted, there's boxes all over the place. Like in Westminster, Colorado, at the rec center at the 104th and Sheridan, there's a drop-off box right there in the Circle Drive at the Westminster Community Center and Fitness Center. In addition to that, we've got interesting data, real data from the sources. It relates to Puerto Rico. Recently, there's been some numbers that came out about the deaths that were associated with the hurricane, and federal numbers were coming out as 64 people died. 64 tragedies, but not a lot of numbers for as big of an event that was. But then when you look at the source of the event in Puerto Rico, the numbers are plus 7 times that. Actually, the real results in the deaths is 4,600. 4,600 people died in the situations in Puerto Rico. So make sure you look at the real numbers. Make sure you look at the real numbers and identify what's going on there. Now, I think what we've got here, folks, as I get into the show and our first guest, which is Stephen Robinson, we're going to go to come off of the Facebook Live feed because Stephen's internet is not giving us what we want. So we're going to disconnect that and stop our show. Goodbye, and go live on the phone with him. So we'll do that and hook him in with us. I'm going to call Stephen on his cell phone line and bring him in and do our thing. Okay? I love Siri. So Siri, help me out here. Siri, call Stephen Robinson Mobile. That was an ad for Apple. Now here we go. See, she's on the headsets with us. As I do that, as we're calling in Stephen, everybody look at this little bracelet right here. Look at that. Great little plastic beads, little string, little medallion there. And that's from 4ocean.com. 4ocean.com. This is my community service plug. Stephen, buddy, what's up?
I can see you and hear you on there, but you keep dropping off.
Yeah, that's just technology. We just adapt and adjust, my friend. We're gonna go airways with the phone with you and stick with that. As I said to everybody, this is Stephen Robinson. He is a friend and colleague. He's gonna share his ideas and thoughts from the perspective of not only a patriot, but also his interactions with military at many different levels around the world and the country, and give me his perspective on what are we doing with this? The effort that was made by the players at San Francisco, Colin Kaepernick, is not what's being pushed and promoted through the leadership in our country. And I don't know about you, but I'm very much about the boots on the ground and the people that really matter, the voices of the voters, and so should our politicians, especially coming up to our midterms. But that's got some influence on our sports stuff. But let me finish about my 4oceans.com. This little bracelet I have on here. This was made from all of the garbage that has been removed from the ocean, and any of the disposable, recyclable products makes these bracelets. And for a $20 minor investment, over half of that $20 goes towards picking up pounds and pounds more of that kind of trash in our oceans. And it's 4ocean.com. Check that out. I'm really loving it. I got one for me and my wife so that I can make a difference. I made a difference. That's what I did. And on the back of this little card, it says, "Dear Ocean, 4Ocean customer, the 4Ocean team would like to personally thank you for the recent purchase of multiple," I got two, 4Ocean bracelets. "Due to your extreme generosity," here's what happens. "We were able to pull numerous pounds of trash from the ocean. Please use the hashtag #Pound4Ocean to spread the word about our bracelets and the importance of saving our oceans." There's no question about that. No question at all. There it is. There's the team, the 4Oceans team along the beach, picking up all of that plastic and trash on the floor or the surface of the ocean. There's some interesting machines that are doing that. So, Stephen, we're back with you. Tell my listeners, who are you? Who is Stephen Robinson? What's your practice? I still have you, bud, or did I lose you?
No, you still got me.
Okay, so tell our listeners, who is Steve Robinson?
Oh, you're cutting out there.
Tell our audience, Stephen, who are you? What's your who are you as a person, and what's your business all about?
Yes, thank you all. Appreciate the chance to share with you guys a little bit. By way of background, I'm the CEO of Even Pulse, which is an education and training company that provides training for performing optimally under stress. I work across the military, within law enforcement, fire rescue, some sports corporations, etc. Essentially, we teach people about how to self-regulate the stress response, but also how to guide themselves toward living a more optimized life. And I think the subject of your show today is certainly appropriate to that, in the sense that I think many of us will often focus on what we don't want or what we're against, rather than what we're for. And I love your 4Oceans connection and talking about taking action and doing something about the issues. And I'm going to speak to a couple things I know that you're going to ask at some point, but I'll save those for a moment.
It's tough when there's two guys like you and I that like to talk. We got to stay focused.
Well, I came to this through a couple of different routes. I grew up as the son of a Presbyterian minister and a teacher, and really became interested in human potential and how people live at an early age. And I grew up as a tennis player and fitness trainer, and also I spent a lot of time studying military special operations and recruited toward the government to do some things in that area. So I have sort of an eclectic background around human performance and resilience to stress. And grew up playing public parks tennis in Richmond. Actually, it was a mostly black community. So my brother and I were sort of the unusual guys in the group in terms of playing tennis down there, but certainly got a good feel for inner city life, and knew what things were like in terms of not being the country club kids.
Yeah, there's a big, I want to see more of it happen, but kids getting involved in programs that never would have been part of their world unless somebody brought it to them, and encouraging kids from all neighborhoods to interact with one another, get a sense of the realities of the world. It's not all just one way. There's all different, diverse things, and appreciating the differences is a key thing I know for both you and I. So as we go along, Stephen, we got 4 different segments to the show. The first one's our intro, which we're in right now, and then we get into mindset, skills, mental conditioning, and performance results, and I'll define the nuances of those as we go along. But let me ask our audience, as well as Stephen, some questions that are on my mind for today's show. And today's show's theme is about players, patriots, and politicians. And if you were told when to eat, when to go to sleep, when to speak, are you free? If the degree of that request was just no, the answer no would not be acceptable. What someone told you when to eat, when to sleep, when to speak, would that degree of influence represent freedom to you? Would you feel like you were independent in your actions? Would you know who you are? Or would it be by the definition of someone else and the questions they ask you to do and the actions that they ask you to take? And would you then be allowed to make mistakes so that you can learn from both your successes and your failures? Now, those questions are related to social justice and fighting social injustice. And we're going to talk about the First Amendment a little bit because we're talking about the NFL players, Colin Kaepernick's effort 2 seasons ago to represent to others in his venue, this big venue where people are watching, hey, look at, I've been around neighborhoods. I've perhaps even been personally experiencing social injustice in my neighborhoods. And I know teammates and friends and colleagues that have been pushed and pulled by people who are telling them when to go to sleep, telling them when to eat, telling them, get out of your car. But officer, I didn't do anything wrong. Get out of your car. I'm the guy. I'm standing here in front of you. Get out of your car. And then because I didn't really understand, the escalation of the scrutiny rose. And yet, in our First Amendment, we have the right to peaceably assemble. And I think that's what needs to be focused, along with the message that Colin Kaepernick brought to the sidelines about social injustice, about people being told what to do by others who felt they had the power to do that and not accept non-compliance or no. And if they did, they had permission to become violent and persecute somebody for not doing exactly what they were being told to do. So I did some research, and Stephen helped me out with this, because in the military, when the flag goes up, from your experience, Stephen, what is a military personnel supposed to do that is in uniform? I think I've got a major delay with Stephen. Well,
you cut out for a second. I heard bits and pieces of that last.
When a military person here sees a flag go up and they're in uniform, Stephen, in your experience, what would you expect to see them do?
They snap to attention and look to the flag. So they're basically orienting toward it. When reveille is played or anything that's around the flag raising military installation, there's sort of a snap to, hop to attitude, and everything stops for that moment, and people orient toward it.
And your experience with first responders, like the police forces, they would have similar responses. Has that been your experience?
Yeah. Police and first responder, fire rescue, there's a sense of patriotism. I think probably what we're looking at in our culture is trying to redefine patriotism in a new way, in which, of course, free speech and who we are as individuals is valued more than focusing first on security or knuckling under to pressures from above, as it were.
Yeah. Now, I don't know how many people know this, but we have federal statutes that give us fairly clear guidelines about when we hear the national anthem and when we see a flag going up formally, it's being raised up the pole, or we're being asked to acknowledge the flag by saying the national anthem. And what I mentioned to Stephen just a minute ago about military in uniform, those are two things that are very specific. When that happens, the statute says they snap to attention and they salute the flag in honoring their country and the flag. Now, if the national anthem is being said with a military person in uniform, the salute is enough. If you're not military, well, actually both military and non-military, not in uniform, you are expected to take off your hat if you have one on and put it over your heart, and you're standing for the national anthem. Now that happens to be U.S. Federal Statute 36 in U.S. Code Section 301, titled the National Anthem. And here it is, fact, right in front of me. I'm reading it, and you can look it up. It says we should face the flag or face towards the music. So if the flag is going up with the national anthem, but if it's not and the national anthem is being played, you face where the music's coming from and stand at attention with your right hand over your heart. Now, if the music is pre-recorded, you're not standing in front of a live band, you need to look straight ahead. So you don't know where the music is at, that's the point. You just stand and look straight ahead. Now, it says the national anthem, you stand. Okay? Now, I'm setting this up because here comes a conflict, Steve. So First Amendment says that not only do we have the freedom of speech, but it says making any law respecting an establishment of religion, prohibiting the free exercise of religion, or abridging the freedom of speech, the freedom of press, here's the big one right here, and the right to peaceably assemble or to petition for governmental redress of grievance. So my guess, but could be fact based on the experience, Colin Kaepernick and the many players of all colors, I might have to say, because people are presuming, based on the research I've done in the last few weeks, that it's only people of color, in particular black people, that took up this fight, this right to assemble and have a grievance to redress the government. It's not. There were people of all different colors standing, locking arms, kneeling, both, and they were coaches, players, fans. It was because of the cause of social injustice. That was the grievance. Not the flag, not the anthem, social injustice. People being persecuted, approached in a violent way by people in authority positions that we supposedly should trust. Well, now that's been eroded sufficiently. So, Steve, when you've been around the country and you're doing your trainings, what are some of the things, without the presence of a flag or the national anthem, what are some actions that you would identify as actions that identify respect towards you and others? What are executives and athletes doing in your presence to represent respect?
I certainly believe demonstrating courtesy, basic courtesy, and kindness to others, making an eye contact. There's so many facets of human interaction and social interaction, I think, that we've lost in general in this culture. I think it has a lot to do with how people are being raised, the level of focus on devices and so on, and really a missing of the cultivation of our human connection to each other. And that's actually governed by the vagus nerve and how we relate to faces. And that has a real spillover, too, to what we talk about in terms of intrinsic or implicit bias. And, it's already hard enough when people can't look at each other. And I see a lot of kids coming up who have trouble making eye contact and looking and holding a gaze and being able to be present in someone's face. Much less you add that if it's someone of color or someone of quote-unquote color looking at me as a white man and seeing me as other, or me seeing them as other. Because I think as soon as we go there, we're not seeing each other as human beings first, but we see just others. So, there's a lot there, and I think, it's a larger societal exploration and cultural exploration, I think, that we need to look at, because we've created not just rifts based on race, but we've created rifts based on not being able to connect to each other at the most fundamental level of just being human.
Well, I'm glad you made that statement, because that was a good segue into American versus Republican or Democrat being an American. And I think that the message, as you pointed out, is being lost to our children when we don't talk about how NFL players, professional athletes in all different sports, are projecting exactly what you just said. They do make eye contact. They look at each other when they walk in the locker room, and they shake hands with one another. And they take the time to represent themselves in a very professional way with one another. But that message isn't getting out because it doesn't serve the power of the people who are making a big deal out of the kneeling. I won't even grace them with the honor of calling them by name because the facts in our Constitution, the facts in our federal statutes are very clear as to what paths one can take when showing respect for the flag. So here's a couple of non-examples. If you did this, you'd be disrespecting the flag. One of those is the flag should never be displayed with the union down, except as a signal of dire distress, which is why military personnel have flags displayed in that way. But in general, you don't do that. You don't carry the flag in a flattened out way. You fold it up, you do it appropriately, and you take it and store it in a proper way. You also don't use it as wearing apparel or bedding or drapery. That's not what it was meant for. Using that emblem to promote and ingratiate yourself with what the flag represents is not cool. You should not put it in a place where it's going to be soiled or damaged in any way. So that, and here's where I'm going to pause a minute, because Stephen, how often have you heard, or maybe even yourself, been part of saying to someone, you need to take your flag down off your flagpole because you've left it up there through the night, all the days, for weeks and weeks, and now it's faded and the edges are tattered.
Yeah.
And that's disrespectful.
Right.
Now, it's not a permanent fixture, people.
Yeah.
And it's simple. It's simple things. How often? And I haven't done it often enough, I have to admit. How often, when we're sitting in the stands at an event, it doesn't even have to be a sporting event, the national anthem is being played, and someone just sits there. They're not disabled in any way. They don't represent themselves as incapacitated in any way. How many of us help them up? Collegially recommend, why don't you stand and honor the flag with me? I don't know that we're holding each other accountable for the loud voices that we have in contradiction and criticism of others. So, what's that phrase, Steve? People who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones? So, if you're not willing to call somebody else out about their disrespect for the flag, simple things. Take your hat off. Put your hand over your heart. Or just take your hat off and stand straight and respect. Then you don't have the right to speak out against anybody else, in my opinion, my humble opinion. Now, here are some facts I want to point out. The NFL owners did not consult with the NFL Players Association, or I call it NFLPA, prior to May 24th, which was the day that they made the decision, franchise owners made the decision to fine players who do anything other than stand in respect to the flag and the national anthem. Now, with that being said, the New York Jets chairman, Chris Johnson, said that their team would not enact any specific rules prohibiting kneeling or other forms of expression. There will be no club fines or suspensions or any sort of repercussions. If the team gets fined, that's just something I'll have to bear, says Johnson. Now, that's not the Philadelphia Eagles. So let me jump to them. So, Steve, what do you think of Fox News' presentation about how the Philadelphia Eagles kneel during the national anthem?
Well, yeah. So,
well, and because of that, let me add this to it. Here's what they found out, Steve. The pictures that Fox News showed, the guys were praying in the end zone. What do we call that? False what? False news? Fake news?
Yeah, interesting.
I mean, now they a week later, they retracted it. They made a formal statement on air saying, we apologize, we're sorry. But isn't the damage already done? Isn't it already, more gasoline on the fire that the executive branch of the White House is pushing and promoting. And maybe, Steve, I don't know if you knew this, but our executive branch leader in 1983 invested $6 million into the Washington Generals, the USFL league team that recruited and eventually signed Doug Flutie. So he had $6 million into it. He tried to take away behind the scenes NFL players to get them to switch over to the USFL, and was legally pressured to stop that activity. And then he filed an antitrust suit against the NFL, which he subsequently lost, because he was irritated that the NFL was rebuking him in that way. Do you think that was basically in the 90s, early 90s then? So do you think that this particular executive branch leader was a little bit miffed, and maybe he's coming back through his power and privilege to harm the NFL?
Yeah, I mean, the whole issue, Lowell, was fascinating to me. And I think some of this, too, goes beyond the flag issue and has a lot to do with the classic management and talent issue. Where you've got the senior leaders, quote unquote, of the organization butting up against the talent who are really the show in terms of the people out in the field performing. So I think there's something that transcends just this in that kind of us versus them mentality. And I don't know, as we look deeper, there's more to it than just the issue of the flag, which obviously is a big deal, but there's more to it than that, I think.
Yeah, and you and I, we're pretty well grounded. We like to be told, here's what it is, regardless of how it makes us feel, we can deal with it. But I really get antsy and nervous about the camouflage of messaging, almost the subterfuge of innuendo. And it's not the real message. It's deeper than that, as you point out. But I would rather just be told, just up front, I didn't like the NFL. I'm coming back at them. I don't care how I do it. Fine. Well, you keep doing that, and other people are going to be. So we have to fit through the labyrinth of conversation and innuendo to get to the truth. And as that's being said, what do we do with the performers? In this case, it's the NFL players. They want to move on. The guys that I talk to, they say, this is ridiculous. We're over this. We know the real reason that Kaepernick and other athletes are fighting against and bringing up social injustice and issues, because that's what's important. But focusing on the game is nothing but a distraction for us. What do you do, Stephen, when you're talking to executives and athletes, and you know that one of their obstacles is people and things that distract them and increases their stress? What do you do to adjust and adapt to that kind of influence?
The primary thing I share with athletes around that role is to look at basically what's in their locus of control and what's in their locus of concern. That's sort of the classic Stephen Covey frame around that. And we frame it a little bit differently, but essentially looking at your environment and starting with your own internal environment first. What do I have leverage over? What can I control, and what can I influence inside of me? And then what's outside of me that could have anything to do with whether it's social justice or spreading beyond that to anything in the larger societal construct of affairs or what have you that we're concerned about, but we don't necessarily have any control over. And I think that's how an effective athlete parses his or her attention effectively to be able to focus on what is the task at hand that is most relevant to my being the best athlete I can be, or for that matter, in any other field of endeavor.
Yeah.
And, I think one of the interesting facets of this is by their nature, professional athletes have a celebrity status. And as celebrities, I think, often we look upon them do things or act in certain ways that would be, laudatory and be a great people growing up and so on. I'm all for free speech, and I believe that athletes, just like anyone else, have the right and ability to make statements about things that are beyond themselves athletically. And at the same time, just back to your point, I think to perform at your best, you've really got to be excellent or outstanding at parsing your attention so that you can focus on what's most important to you at any given point in time to be at your best when you need it the most.
That's a great segue to some quotes from some local folks in the NFL. That would be Joe Ellis, the CEO of the Denver Broncos. His remarks really focus on in the now, staying in the moment, and controlling what we can control in those moments. And he goes on to say this. He says he wants to reiterate the team wants all members of the organization to stand for the anthem, but added at the same time we need to listen to our players and support the issues and causes that matter to them. So, Joe's, it sounds like a very somewhat political statement, but I've been lucky enough to have met Joe a few times and been around him and watched him in audiences, and he's pretty straightforward, and he's going to just try to discover in each moment that he's present with the players, where are you at with this? We're going into this game, preseason game, or we're going to have fans at Dove Valley, and we may or may not have the flag up, and how are we going to handle this? How are you going to handle this? So I believe that there's a number of different franchises that are going to take their own personal stance, regardless of what the vote of the ownership did with Goodell and the NFL. So here's a few more quotes from players in this case. Malcolm Jenkins from the Philadelphia Eagles. He says, what NFL owners did today was thwart the players' constitutional rights to express themselves and use our platform to draw attention to social injustices. Now, that's a global statement. I don't think he necessarily means just about the flag or the national anthem, because there's more than just, in fact, I'm sure he wasn't. He was talking about things outside of the stadium as far as social injustices. And he goes on to say, like, racial inequality in our country. Everyone loses when voices get stifled. That was to Ellis's point from the Broncos. Listen to people, whether it's your players or it's you as a politician or you as a patriot. Talk to the people. Understand what the message is. Go back and look at the video of Colin Kaepernick explaining to the media what his protest was about, and the fact that the First Amendment supports him in the right to have that ability to protest about the inequities that he sees in society. Jenkins goes on to say, while I disagree with the decision, I will not let it silence me or stop me from fighting. For me, this has never been about taking a knee, raising a fist, or anyone's patriotism, but doing what we can do to affect real change for real people. And that goes to your point, Stephen, that you made earlier. Let's have the bigger conversation. Let's not be sided in a political party way. Let's be Americans together and solve problems and address issues that hurt people, that physically and emotionally hurt people. The last quote I have is from Philadelphia Eagles lineman Chris Long, a well-known player, respected by his teammates. And yet he's been one of the most outspoken about social and political issues. He donated $1 million base salary last season to charity. Here's what he says. This is fear of a diminished bottom line. That was a tweet he said. It's also fear of a president turning his base against a corporation. That would be the football franchises. This is not patriotism. Don't get it confused. Long continues and concludes by saying, I am someone who's always looked at the anthem as a declaration of ideals, including the right to peaceful protest. That's a First Amendment right that he says about. He finishes by saying, our league continues to fall short on this issue. So he takes a shot at the owners as a collective. And I think they do. I don't know that we'll ever know what their real motivation and impetus was for voting to put this kind of fine in place if you don't stand. Here's my point, and Steve, I'd like your comments on this. When is it going to be enough that we start asking leaders to step up as leaders in those moments when we need guidance about the right way, the path that's the best for our culture, for us as Americans? When I was a kid, the national anthem was part of school every day. The Pledge of Allegiance, every day. And I learned about the country because of that Pledge of Allegiance. That we had government class, we talked about voting, we talked about history of our country. I challenge you, as Jimmy Fallon and others in the late night talk show hosts do, they have their little games about how smart are people walking on the street if I ask them a question about what's the capital of California? What are the first two words of the national anthem? I mean, just little simple stuff. And we're so disappointed when we hear the answers of people.
Right, much less if you ask people what the Bill of Rights is, and they say, well, is that something you get after you have a meal?
Yeah.
Is that the patron's right?
Yeah.
As a political scientist, I mean, those kinds of things, when we look at the founding of this country, and particularly just to go back to the flag piece, the flag is a symbol of what many people sacrificed in order for this country to become what it was and is. And I think, many of these protests are very well grounded in the fact that a lot of people feel like with the social injustices and many other facets of the haves versus the have-nots and people who are in positions of influence and leverage, that there's been sort of a silencing of dissent and a silencing or attempts to silence people who see things in a different way than those who are operating from sort of a bully pulpit. And I certainly can feel the frustration many people feel and share around that. To me, that's what our flag represents. It represents the Bill of Rights in many ways. That was the huge battle after the signing of the Constitution. That was really the whole next level with how we affirming that our citizens have certain inalienable rights, and what are those? What were we missing when we read the Constitution? So. Yeah,
and I think the clear understanding, I'm going to put a little burden on our educators and moms and dads at home. If you don't like what you see at a sports contest as it relates to honoring the national anthem or the Pledge of Allegiance, then make sure you check your own house first before you make a derogatory remark towards someone else without deep understanding. I've had situations where, I've ridden public transportation and saw an individual's kids running around amok, being just crazy, and presuming that the parent, the only one parent that was there, was having difficulty controlling their kids. And when I confronted the gentleman, I said, hey, there's a lot of people on the bus. Your kids might get hurt, could stop quickly. You might want to take control of them. He said, yeah, I thought about that as they were jumping around the seats and people were coming in and out of the bus. But we just left their mom, who died of cancer. And I just went, whoa, that's like a brick between my eyes. And you just don't know. We have to have a dialogue that discovers the facts. Not someone's opinion based on power or control that they want to have over others, but real, substantiated, experiential-based facts. So that when you see someone peacefully assembling to petition through their actions in a redress of grievance with the government, you know why. You give a shit. You care about, so that you can move on, or you can choose to participate, but you have the choice. Like right now, the players, the ones I talk to around the country, and I've got players all over the country in the NFL, and I've talked to some non-NFL players about the issue of respecting and disrespecting the national anthem and the flag, and they say it's a distraction for us to stay focused in our moments about the contest that we're going to play, or the performance in practice to get better, so that we're ready. So that's why many of these people are saying, I just want to move on. And speaking of move on, before I get to my next point, Stephen, I got to be commercially aware. So let me start with you. Stephen, what's some of the things coming up for you, and how do people reach you?
Yeah, so one of the things that comes up for me is to go back to the locus of control, locus of concern. I think there's a huge amount of information coming from a variety of directions to all of us through media that say, look at me, look at me, look at this issue. There's another storm, there's another disaster about to happen. We're about to get attacked or what have you. I think there's so many things that can distract us from really staying on point and on task in terms of what's truly important to us, our performance, our families, our communities, etc. So that's the big one that hits me. Our website, you said how can people reach us?
Yeah.
Evenpulse.com, www.evenpulse.com. We're on the web. We're about to actually launch a new web platform for teams and organizations. And, I think one of the things, just to go back to your original point that's important to me, is to be an expert at parsing your attention. So in today's world, and when we talk about moving on, I think a lot of the athletes who've been involved with the protests truly do want to see change. And one of the things that's been completely underreported is, people like Long and others who've donated huge amounts of money. Many athletes who've gone into their communities and truly made a difference. And those are the stories that I want to hear about. If my attention gets pulled anywhere other than things that I've normally prioritized, I want to hear those stories. Who's out there doing good and making change, and helping people who are underrepresented or who might be at-risk youth, building communities, supporting our military and law enforcement, what have you. But those stories, unfortunately, just seem to sort of fall by the wayside because they're not the negative news that charges people's attention.
Yeah, it's not the train wreck on the side of the road we all stop and gawk at, and that's a shame. It's never going to go away, but I'd like to change the percentage. Let's raise the positivity up above the negative that draws our attention. And here's another consequence, Stephen, to that point that's happening. A lot of the players I've talked to have said, you know what? I don't need these hassles, so I'm not going to expose myself to the public in ways that might raise questions of my loyalty or my respect for the country. So they're not doing their summer camps. So kids are missing out. They're not doing as many public appearances because they don't want to be asked questions about, hey, when the season comes, are you going to kneel? Or are you going to stand up? Or are you going to stay in the locker room? It shouldn't make any difference. It shouldn't be highlighted in a way that I have to finding myself in an environment that's already charged with caustic, negative, predisposed thoughts about me. Like they're just waiting on the edge of their seats. Who's gonna kneel during the national anthem? Let's take a look at the lineup and the numbers and see who's sitting in the locker room. It becomes a show of distress that takes away from so many great things. It diminishes, like you said, it diminishes Chris Long's efforts. It doesn't even get pressed, or it causes players to make decisions that regretfully hurt kids in the community. I hope that's not the case. Now, as your guys are listening out there, I want to make sure to remind you, I got a little excited. We're at KUHSdenver.com. I'm your host, Laura Whiteman of 360 Performance Talk. We look at performance from all different angles and use the world of sports and sports performance as our metaphor to bring up and focus on those people and things that may both promote and or diminish human performance. And in this case, I don't think it's not too muddled or unclear as to the attitude and energy that's been created around this NFL player kneeling or not kneeling. And then the subsequent ruling by the franchise owners that, hey, if you kneel, you're going to get fined. And on the second incident, you could get suspended. Now, that being said, the executives of some of these franchises are stating publicly, you know what, don't worry about it. Chris Johnson, New York Jets, he said, as the chairman of the Jets, he says, we're not going to place fines on people or suspend them or any sort of repercussions if a team, members of the team decide to do something other than stand in attention according to the mandate recently put down on May 24th. I think that's unfortunate that the executives have to be distracted in that way when the real priorities are get prepared for a very competitive game, a very violent game, a game that requires focus so that you tackle somebody the right way and you don't hurt yourself or them if you do it wrong. And if you're doing things to distract these players and you're in control of the words you say, I would ask you, I would implore you, be positive. Buy your tickets, buy your beverage, buy your popcorn, whatever, and go enjoy the game of football. Go enjoy the game of baseball and have fun at it. Now, we're in our final segment, which is performance results. And what performance results means is what are the processes that you use to get things in place. Now, I've given you quotes from players in the NFL, some with Philadelphia Eagles, some with other teams, that said that their process in honoring their country is to continue to honor their country in a way that fits them. That could be them standing, could be them kneeling, could be that they're going to sit on the bench. Now understand, if it happens to be a 300-pound lineman that's sitting on a bench as the national anthem is going, I might give him a break because he's got to move that 300 pounds for the next few minutes, hours, if you will, to get ready. So it's a difficult thing for me to push players to be compliant with this. I'm not forgiving them, okay? I'm not dismissing their respect. But let's listen to them and let them honor and respect not only their country, but the game that feeds their family. So, Stephen, when you honor our country, what do you do?
Well, I mean, I always do my best to show respect for wherever I am and whomever I'm with. And I think respect begets respect. You know, the word origin of that is to look at our show again. So we're bringing attention again back to whatever that person or situation is. You know, I think you can have peaceful protests against anything. And you know, I honor each individual's right to not only be an individual, but to be autonomous within themselves. And I think that's what our civil liberties and freedoms are all about. And when we start to say that's not okay for any reason, you know, I think that's a fundamental problem in our culture. And the other thing that occurred to me while you were talking a minute ago was I look at the negativity bias in terms of where our attention goes around the press and, you know, often how the media will stir issues like this. And I think that for athletes, one of the hard things is we have a negativity bias within ourselves anyway. And it's so easy to focus on the negative and on our mistakes or what's wrong rather than focusing on what we need to do to execute our skills. And I'm not suggesting in kind of a Pollyanna way to ignore your errors, because as athletes, that's how we learn. We learn from making our mistakes. But, you know, I think it's so easy for athletes to end up beating themselves up and focusing on what they didn't do or how the mistakes played out versus learning from that and then turning that into, okay, what exactly do I need to be doing to execute my skills and my tasks, contribute to the team, etc.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the performance and striving for your best, because as you alluded to, anytime there's a person or thing that gets in the way of the thought process of a high performer, an elite performer, that action by the person or thing raises the probability of that individual elite performer becoming injured. Because in the pro sport arena, you can't hesitate with your ability to deliver. Because if you do, you'll get beat by somebody else. Because that's the whole magic of the game. Somebody hoping that they're performing and practiced harder than you did, and in a given moment, their practice and preparation overwhelms and overtakes you. Now, that being said, if there's anything that gets in the way of distracting you or sets a thought in your head that doesn't allow you to release freely what you can bring to the table, you got a good chance of getting hurt. And in football, the hurts aren't subtle. We're talking about like fast-moving vehicles purposefully having collisions. And if it's not done right, somebody's going to come away hurt. And there's no guarantee. And that, I guess, as a coach and a sports performance person, what's going on with those who are not involved in the game? They're not owners. They may be disappointed and distressed people that wanted to be an owner, but weren't allowed to because of their lack of integrity and their selfish behavior. But they're on the outside, and they're using their power to manipulate a situation to send a point home with the community at large. And I would really like to get to the bottom line of why the NFL owners made the decision they did to vote on this. There's been, let me ask you this, Steve. You're a business owner. I'm a business owner. If you and I thought that there were forces in the marketplace that were causing our customers to not come and find us, or new customers to come and find us, because there was a question about our ability to serve, what would you do? What actions would you take to go forward and try to change that mindset in the marketplace?
Certainly, I'd want to go forward and create a different perception that we're able to not only meet a market need, but deliver to it effectively. Wanting to make sure our messaging gets out, that we have a service and something that is beneficial to people. I think a very positive, proactive stance in terms of creating a perception that's based on reality, that we have something excellent to share with people.
And that's where this really gets, and you're absolutely right. Totally agree with you. So here's some facts. Has the NFL ever done anything for wounded or retired veterans?
Have we? Absolutely. We actually have had a nonprofit for years. I've not done a lot of it recently, but we've served about 6,000 to 7,000 veterans between 2006 and 2009. Many returning from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and provided complimentary services to them and their families and care providers and so on. It was an act of care for our communities and people coming back, and whether you agree with the wars or not, and back the idea of the U.S. being out doing what it's doing with international security, the fact is these young men and women, or not so young, have been coming home, many of them broken or certainly injured by their wartime experiences, and that's the way that we chose to give back.
And Steve, that would mean your actions prove a degree of patriotism, honor, and respect for our country and the people that serve it so faithfully. And the same thing could be said for the NFL and a lot of things they do. So why on this earth are they not standing up and getting very rigid and confrontational with a power that is coming at them and challenging their patriotism? It's unfounded. If you look at what they've done historically and the responses they get from active servicemen and women now, as well as those who have been retired and are wounded and retired, it's an overwhelming energy and reality that these players do not deserve the distractions. Move on. Stand up. The NFL owners stand up and tell a power-hungry executive, power-hungry politician in the executive branch to back off. It's not founded. And if you ask people who have season tickets, which I have, by the way, to the Denver Broncos, they go there for the game. They don't watch who's kneeling. They're not going to care if there's a missing number on the sideline because he's in the locker room as his choice to not be on the field during the national anthem. This is ridiculous. We're causing a situation that that opens the door for disrespect rather than promoting the honor, humility, and integrity of our country and the people who serve it. Now, as we come close to... Go ahead, Steve.
I was going to say, I couldn't agree with you more on the move on issue. We need to move on from this and also redirect attention toward what can we do from here to correct some of these huge issues. I mean, social injustice. You started your show with talking about environmental pollution. I mean, we saw whales washing up on the beach the other day in Southeast Asia. They're filled with plastic bags. And it's like, it's a big deal. When our oceans are so polluted that, you go down to the Caribbean and literally there's a stream of lots of ingestum, like all around these islands of just grotesque stuff floating around. It's like, what are we doing with our practices as people? And what are we paying attention to? What's important to us?
Yeah, no, exactly. And there's another quote here that I want to share that is, it's a restatement of a quote that Chris Long said. He says, "I'm someone who's always looked at the anthem as a declaration of ideals." Ideals! And when you bring up these considerations about, are you kneeling, are you standing, what are you doing, you got your hand over your heart or not, that's a distraction from all kinds of issues that represent our ideals. The ideals that we deserve healthy environments, clean lifestyles, and protection for that. That we don't see whales washed up on coastlines because their bellies are full, very small bellies, by the way. So a plastic bag, one plastic bag, could kill a very large whale. And we're not looking at the injustices that are happening on street corners to kids who are just going to school, but have to go through the streets in a way that they need to avoid remarks or physical confrontation because there's not anybody they think they can trust in the neighborhood to protect them. And that's unfair because there's some really great police officers and firemen and ambulance workers and medical professionals that are doing this, but because of one, maybe two, maybe more than that, maybe their whole daily lives, that reinforce, I can't trust anybody. Now, I don't want to extend this too broadly, what's happening on the NFL sidelines, but it is one of many things that we're distracted from looking at the real things that represent our ideals, declaratively, as Chris Long stated. That the anthem represents a declaration of ideals. We have to stay focused on our ideals. So, Steve, the theme today was on players, patriots, or politicians. And I think in some regards, every day I'm one of those, to a certain degree, I'm one of those things. I regret that as it relates to the NFL, there's too much politicians and not enough focus on the players who are patriots. Because there's so many examples of when they have been. And they don't deserve these distractions. They deserve to be allowed to play that very violent game that they love and move on. Two-a-days are coming in less than 2 months. OTAs are almost over. Then they get a little bit of a break. Do they really need this distraction? Because even the players that I confronted the other day, I said, no. Yeah, I know you don't want to hear about it. I know you want to move on. But do not be the person that was in 1940s Germany who didn't think that because of the things that were being said about a Protestant, a prostitute, the poor, Jewish people, people who weren't as healthy as you, those things weren't going to turn into violent outcomes of purifying the races. When you ignore what is said because you don't want to confront it, that's the beginning of a bigger problem. We need to step up. We need to hold each American accountable for the ideals that we all believe in. Steve, in the last 30 seconds or so we have for the show, what do you have to say to our listeners about you, your business, and the theme that we've talked about today? I thank you so much for being part of it and encourage you and your lovely wife in everything you do.
Thank you. Well, appreciate that. And yeah, I would say, in an era where we've got a lot of the dialogue about what's important in the world being commandeered by people who are loud and having things to say about it, commandeer your own dialogue inside of yourself. Put your attention on what's important to you and go out and do something about it.
That's absolutely great words for ending the show today. Hey, you're listening to 360 Performance Talk. I'm your host, Lowell Whiteman. This has been great today with Steve Robinson with evenpulse.com is his website. Go check that out. It's got some new things coming. We've got some great things happening next week on the show. We're gonna bring in some nutritional things. And we're going to talk about moms and dads and club sports and what it is to be, or hopefully not be, a helicopter parent and help your child have the best experience they can at the most highest level of performance in the sport that they participate in. That's next week. Have a great, great weekend. And as we break away, listen to the NBA theme song for the NBA Finals this week. Maybe it's the last game tonight. Maybe Golden State will put it away 4-0 possibly for the game tonight against LeBron and the Cleveland Cavaliers. And once again, I'm Lowell Whiteman, your host, 360 Performance Talk on KUHSdenver.com. Have a great, great weekend. All right, coming at you, Jagged Edge. Let's get married.